This is My Randomology, and in this very special episode, we're celebrating the movies of 2024. Celebrating might be a stretch. This is the first ever My Randomology Awards. Now, what is this? Well, we're going to take a look at all the movies that we saw in 2024 here on the channel, and we're going to award them prizes. What do they win? Well, nothing less than the coveted Golden Laszlo. Yes, better than the Oscars, the SAG, the Emmys, all of them. And what is this based on? Purely subjective. I took a long time to put this together, and I was going to put polls up, but then I realized it's going to take even more time. So, next one, yes, this will be a viewer selection, but at least for this first one, it's entirely based on my own personal preference. What do I know? First up, we've got Best Villain, and the nominees are Oliver Quick, Saltburn. Saltburn seemed to come out of nowhere and feature a story that had so many twists and turns that, honestly, I don't think many of us really realized that Oliver was even the villain for most of it. Abigail, from Abigail. Unfortunately for the movie's release, the trailers and pretty much all of the promotion gave away the fact that Abigail was in fact the villain, and had they kept it under wraps, it would have been a twist on par with From Dusk Till Dawn. But still, an amazing performance and a delightful villain. The Vampires, from Near Dark. This family feels like the anti-Twilight family, to be honest. They were grimy, they were grungy, they were grimy, they were grungy, they were dirty, did I mention grimy? And oh so much fun to watch. And finally, Godzilla from Godzilla Minus One. You would think after so many decades of Godzilla, we would have gotten tired of the big guy, but apparently they decided to make another movie, and in this one, we not only got back to basics, but got a Godzilla that was a genuinely frightening monster. And the winner is... Godzilla! While there are many entertaining villains that we saw in the movies the last year, Godzilla, I think, really took the cake because it wasn't just a rehash of, what we've seen before. In a lot of ways it was. It kind of went back to basics, to that very first Godzilla movie. But Godzilla Minus One turned him into basically a walking nuclear disaster. He was a straight up villain that carried the story. Amazingly enough, the effects in the movie were made for a fraction of what a movie like this would have been made here in the States. It's one thing to just make Godzilla a monster. It's another thing to make him a force of nature that feels like the finger of God just cutting a swath across the world. Up next, we've got Best Remake/Sequel, and the nominees are Alien Romulus. Surprising a lot of people, the latest Alien movie managed to actually undo the bad taste that so many of us had in the last several installments of the Alien franchise. It felt fresh while also paying homage to the classics, and featured again villains that were genuinely scary. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2. A surprisingly, shockingly better movie than its predecessor. Winnie the Pooh 2 managed to up the ante in every sense of the word. Bigger budget, gorier kills, better effects, a surprisingly layered story. Godzilla Minus One. In what I think is the first Godzilla movie set chronologically before the original one, of course this exists in its own continuity, this movie managed to, again, create a kaiju movie that also made us feel for the human characters. That's incredible. And the fact that it had so many years of competition to fight against and still managed to become, in what many people believe is the best Godzilla movie probably since the original, is a feat. Annabelle Creation. While the Conjuring movies have their dedicated fan base, a lot of the horror community don't really think of them too highly, if only because they're PG-13. However, Annabelle Creation managed to actually have characters that were worth rooting for, and some genuine scares. It was a step up from the previous installment. And the winner of Best Remake/Sequel is... Godzilla Minus One. I think it's pretty safe to say that the entire Godzilla community really rallied around Godzilla Minus One as a triumph, not just as a Godzilla movie, but as a triumph as a film. This is the first Godzilla movie to win an Oscar, and the fact that a sequel, a remake, managed to win that honor should tell you everything you need to know about the quality of this movie. Up next, we've got Best Performance, and the nominees are Lance Henriksen, Pumpkinhead. I put off watching Pumpkinhead for almost 20 years, and I am kicking myself so hard because of it. Lance Henriksen pretty much stole the show, giving a performance that was tragic, that was sad, that was powerful. He had probably one of my favorite sequences of the entire year, the death scene of his son and the subsequent sequences of him seeking revenge. I don't think anybody ever doubted that the man could act, but if you only saw this performance of his, you'd know everything you need to know. Barry Keoghan? Saltburn. The twist in Saltburn that Oliver is actually the villain of the story would not have been nearly as effective had Barry Keoghan not been able to play the character as both the innocent Oliver and, by the end of it, the sociopathic mass murdering Oliver. Barry Keoghan managed to get a performance that was both subtle and in some ways over the top in different scenes, really highlighting just how layered and complex Oliver was. David Dastmalchian, Late Night with the Devil. It's kind of hard to believe that this is the man's first starring role in a major production. You've probably seen this guy in everything. I mean, he's kind of the linchpin of the DC universe across multiple franchises. And while he's always been that guy, you know, one of those, I know him from somewhere, the fact that he managed to be front and center for the entirety of this movie really speaks to his talent. Demi Moore, The Substance. Again, not that anybody doubted that Demi Moore could act, she could, but The Substance was something of a shocker in not just how far she was willing to go as an actress in both the physical performance and the emotional performance, but the way that the movie really hinged on her. And the winner is... Demi Moore, The Substance. I'm not the only one that saw how good Demi Moore was. She won awards for this performance, and rightfully so. If you've not seen The Substance, please do yourself a favor and watch it. This is an actress who is reclaiming her status as an actress. Our next category, biggest surprise. Not biggest twist in a movie, but just the movies that I was not exactly hopeful for. I didn't know what to expect, and that ended up surprising me in a very good way. And the nominees are Ravenous. I recall this movie coming out. I remember watching a trailer for it and then just kind of forgetting about it. And then when I asked people, hey, should I watch this? Overwhelmingly, you all said yes. And it was an amazing time. A complex story, a complex conflict, incredible performances. Not sure about the soundtrack, but 99% of this movie was incredible. The Lair of the White Worm, a horror comedy starring Hugh Grant. Okay, seems campy enough, and you know what? It was. This actually turned out to be one of my favorite horror comedies of the last couple of years, even though it came out many, many more years ago than that. It was weird, pseudo-Lovecraftian, it was just odd, and I loved every second of it. The Edge of Sleep. I am generally weary of YouTube creators going off and doing stuff that's not directly related to what they do. Case in point, you know, going into acting when you're not an actor. And yet Markiplier has done certain acting gigs before this, a couple of voiceover works as well, and this turned out to be an odd and twisted and amazingly well-acted performance all around from the entire cast. Phantasm. The amount of people screaming that I had to watch this movie was deafening, and it was worth all 90 minutes. This felt like a waking nightmare in the best sense possible, and despite having questions at the end, I was perfectly fine with it. And the winner is... Phantasm. Not only was this one of those films that I love that doesn't actually explain anything, things just happen and characters are fine with it because we don't need explanations. It made me want to watch the entire series, and as of me recording this, I've already put out Phantasm 2, and I will be doing Phantasms 3, 4, and 5 over the next couple of weeks. Up next, one of the ones we've all been waiting for, Best Death Scene. This is not necessarily the goriest death scene, but just the death scene that really stuck with the audience, namely me. And the nominees are Godzilla, Godzilla Minus One. Sure, I know, technically he's not dead. I mean, kind of like how Freddy doesn't die at the end of every Nightmare on Elm Street, even though he kind of does, but then comes back. And yet, the climax of Godzilla Minus One was an emotional punch that really tied everything together. Billy Harley, Pumpkinhead. Though we only saw him for the first couple of minutes of the movie, Billy's death really kicks off what is probably one of the best revenge horror movies I've ever seen. It also kicks off a moral dilemma with his father that is honestly breathtaking. His final death scene with Lance Henriksen is a crushing, really sad scene, especially for anybody with kids. Jacob's Ladder. I knew going into Jacob's Ladder that there was going to be something very Silent Hill-esque about it, but I was not really prepared for how dramatic it was. Jacob's death at the end, while you could see it coming, really was the final part that really closed everything together. Frank, The Rocky Horror Picture Show. Of the many scenes in the Rocky Horror Picture Show that people usually talk about or quote, Frank's death scene is probably not one of them. His closing number was oddly emotional and very sad. Despite Frank being a killer in the movie, he is, after all, one of the main villains, it was a very sad and depressing scene to see, somebody so full of life die. And the winner is Godzilla. I don't think it can be overstated just how powerful the death scenes in Godzilla -1 were. I mean, the massacre in the beginning kind of kicked everything off for our main character. There's a scene in the middle, which I'm not going to totally give away, even though I'm spoiling most of the movie. But Godzilla's final battle and the kamikaze run that eventually kills him is a gut punch throughout. The music, the impact, what it means for our character. Our next category is biggest missed opportunity. These are movies that had the potential to become something fantastic, something unique, maybe something greater than the sum of their parts, and somewhere along the line, things went foobar. And our nominees are Tamara. While you could generously describe this as kind of a 90s version of Carrie, Tamara really had the opportunity to do a lot more in terms of talking about the themes of bullying and abuse and obsession, and yet it never really explored any of those themes, even though you could see pieces of those discussions in the final product. Stepford Wives, 2004. The original Stepford Wives was an incredible critique of feminism and patriarchy back in the 70s and 60s. However, the Stepford Wives 2004 remake seemed to not really talk about those things and just talk about the concepts in the most superficial aspect, where it really could have talked about how these things have changed in the decades since the original. In A Violent Nature. At its core, this movie has a very interesting premise, a slasher movie told from the point of view of the killer. That alone already piqued my interest. However, in execution, we take far too long following the killer. And I understand what the filmmakers were talking about when they said, you will be rewarded with a good scene after following him walking through the forest for hours and hours and hours. And yes, there are moments of the movie that shine through. However, pacing-wise, this movie takes far too long, and if I hadn't had to sit down to watch it, I might have actually turned it off out of boredom. Maxine. X was a movie that seemed to come out of nowhere, and its sequel, Pearl, likewise hit so many people over the head with how good it was. People were more than excited for Ty West to finish off the Maxine trilogy, and yet the final product doesn't feel like it matches the energy or the magic or the emotion of the original film. And our winner is Maxine. The fact that Maxine's best acting scene happened in the first 5 minutes of the movie should tell you just how much the ball was dropped over and over again in this movie. Maxine almost becomes a secondary character in her own movie, and her character arc pretty much gets resolved in the first 10 minutes of this third film. She doesn't do much beyond just react to what other people are doing, and even at the climax of the movie, she has other people do the work, and she just kind of steps up and takes the credit for it. Our next category, Worst Picture, and the nominees are... God, here they come. Amityville Turkey Day. Unknown to me, I saw this after Amityville Thanksgiving, and Turkey Day was a direct sequel to it. And as anybody who's ever been in the horror section of Tubi knows, there's too many Amityville movies, and these two are something else. Bad production, bad script, pacing that makes In a Violent Nature look like a TikTok video. Poltergeist. Trauma is not known for making high-quality, mass appeal films, and I knew that going into this, and yet Poltergeist managed to somehow lower the bar so absolutely low, with jokes that, even for 2006, don't really land. Not to mention a focus on trying to be more disgusting than actually funny. Mousetrap. This was the first of the Mickey Mouse themed horror movies that came out, with a couple more on the way. As of me recording this, I believe Mouse of Horrors is already up on the channel. However, this movie did absolutely nothing with the fact that they could now use Steamboat Willie's version of Mickey Mouse. Even as a slasher movie, it failed on so many respects. Rebel Moon. Look, this is not on the list just because Zack Snyder directed it, okay? Even though the direction is part of why this movie is on here. And honestly, you know what? Forget it. It's not Rebel Moon. It's Rebel Moon Parts 1 and 2. While every modern work is derivative of other works, to a certain extent, Rebel Moon just felt like it tacked on pieces of other franchises onto this one without really doing too much with it. Add to that Zack Snyder went really crazy with the slow-mo on this one, and the pacing just ground to a halt. And a character that really is to blame for the entire thing, and guess what? He's not actually one of the villains. And the winner is... Amityville Turkey Day. While on a technical level, Turkey Day actually is a better put-together movie than its predecessor, Amityville Thanksgiving, Turkey Day manages to not have learned anything from the previous one. All it had was what appears to be just a slightly bigger budget. There is no one to root for. We don't even learn people's names until maybe 45 minutes into the film, and this is not apparently by design. They apparently just forgot to say people's names. Continuity was all over the place, camera work was shaky, and again, just like its predecessor, it ended with a long sequence of people talking about what we just saw without adding anything to the movie. And now, before we get to our final 3 categories, a moment of silence for those we've lost this past year. Yes, YouTube can be a harsh mistress. These are the films that have been taken down this year for one reason or another. I do my best to try to edit to make sure that movies can stay on here for your viewing pleasure, but there's only so much I can do. I've gone as far as 43 different edits for things like Abigail and Renfield, and yet even beyond that, there's a point where even I have to say, I can't do this. However, these cherished friends of ours live on. If you sign on to Patreon, every one of these videos is there for viewing for those who actually become patrons. Now on to our final 3 categories. First up, we've got Creepiest Picture. Now our next category is Scariest Picture, so I'd like to very briefly talk about what makes Creepier Picture different from Scariest Picture. When we talk about creepy, we're talking about a feeling of dread, an uncomfortableness, something that just makes you not just be tense, but there's something wrong. Maybe you can't quite place your finger on it, but there's something that's making you uncomfortable on the screen. Could be the music, could be the visuals, and it's a feeling that carries on long after a scare may wear off. And our categories are The Dark and the Wicked. Here is a possession movie that pulls no punches. It is bloody. It is gory. It manages to make something as simple as just a bell ringing feel like someone just scratched nails on a chalkboard. House of Screaming Glass. This is the newest picture from Red Scream Studios, and let me tell you, it is a slow burn, and yet it is also one of my favorite movies that I saw in the last year. It has this timelessness that is difficult to describe. If you just started watching this movie and told someone, hey, this is a movie from the 80s or the 90s, maybe even the late 70s, you could probably believe that. With a single performer on screen for most of its runtime, it manages to create a sense of dread that permeates every single minute of the movie. Perfect Blue. One of the few anime movies that were on the channel this year, Perfect Blue was definitely a mind trip. Watching it, I could definitely see the influence on things like Black Swan, but Perfect Blue also had that strange dreamlike quality in movies like Phantasm. Longlegs. This entire movie is shot like somebody's nightmare. There are shots that just linger. You start looking for things, not to mention the fact that you end up looking for devils once you realize that the devil is in the movie. And the winner is House of Screaming Glass. While I think there may have been individual moments that were creepier in the other nominees, overall, House of Screaming Glass managed to keep that tension for over an hour and a half. It's hard enough to create tension in a 5 or 10 minute scene, but to do it for the entire run of the movie, almost as soon as it starts, is, I think, a testament to the filmmakers and their patience and how much faith they had in their abilities to just drag the audience into this world. And now, Scariest Picture. This is the one that made me jump. This is the one that my heart almost jumped out of my throat. So our nominees are Oddity. Another movie that kind of flew under the radar when it first came out. Oddity ended up having probably some of my favorite jump scares of the entire year, including one jump scare that caught me completely off guard because I knew there was a jump scare coming, but it wasn't coming from where I thought it was coming from. This guy a walker, or can he actually? Oh my God! Oh! The Dark and the Wicked. Not only is this a movie that ends up feeling creepy throughout, it is a movie that has jump scares strewn throughout. There are revelations in individual sequences that just make the tension just ratchet up before it comes back down just a little bit, but by the end of it, oh boy, you need a hug and a drink. Longlegs. Combine the very disjointed sequences with the titular Longlegs and the way the rest of the movie is shot, and this movie just makes you jump up and get tense the entire time, over and over again. The fact that you're not entirely quite sure how much of what you're seeing is supernatural, how much is not, really adds to that tension of not knowing, and once that scare actually does come, you're really not entirely prepared for it. High tension. Having finished watching the movie, I did have some very unkind things to say about those last 15 minutes. For most of it, High Tension ended up being an amazingly violent and scary picture. The home invasion sequence alone would have been worth the price of admission. And again, discounting the final minutes, which if you want to see what I'm talking about, please go ahead and watch that reaction. It was a genuinely scary, frightening film. And the winner is Oddity. Not only did Oddity really use the jump scares in order to create, scares for the audience, but those jump scares came with a lot of emotional baggage, especially a lot of the flashbacks, including that one jump scare that I mentioned earlier. There's a movie that really used characters and really used emotion and really used filmmaking to build a scene. And so once that horror creeps in and it gets you. And now for our final category, Best Picture. And the nominees are Godzilla -1. Not much more to say at this point. This was a critically acclaimed film by people who don't even watch Godzilla movies. The Substance. I am so happy this movie came out because it brought horror and science fiction kind of into the forefront of discussion and kind of pop culture again. Exuma. The best way I can describe this is imagine a Hellblazer comic set in South Korea. While this is the movie's first nomination, that's not to say that it didn't do any of the other things on the show here well. In fact, it did. It had scares. It was creepy. I think other films did it overall better, but that's a high bar to reach. And yet Exuma is an incredible movie that touches on a lot of South Korean history and Buddhist mythology and folklore and is an experience. Oddity. The bulk of this movie takes place within a single set and a single location, and you'd never know it because it feels so big. It feels like there's so much happening, and there's emotional stakes and a mystery, and so many things just worked out so amazing for this production. And the winner is Godzilla -1. Not much more to say at this point about this movie. The music, the acting, the character arcs, the effects. My God, those effects on that budget. This movie was announced, people were curious, and it came in and it just absolutely wrecked everybody's expectations. I mean, even people who had high expectations. I've rewatched this movie I don't know how many times since I already reacted to it. And there you have it. Those are our winners for the first ever My Randomology Awards. Every one of these movies will have a golden Laszlo attached to their description. Those that are not on the channel, unfortunately, like Godzilla -1, will have it on their Patreon post. So if you want to see those movies that are taken down, you can become a patron and browse all of the movies, and you get the movies a week early. You also get them a week early if you sign up through YouTube. However, through YouTube, there's always the chance that they will get taken down for everybody. In that case, apologies for that. So there you have it. I am recording this about halfway through February. We've already got several movies in the can for 2025, and it has been amazing. So I look forward to seeing what the rest of the year brings. Thank you very much for watching. Congratulations to all of the winners. Not that any of you will probably see this. Although I have actually gotten reached out to by some of the filmmakers in some of the movies that are on here. There's discussions in the comments for example, Monster Portal, which I was not expecting. I got somebody that worked on Poltergeist reached out and actually gave me some videos of them working on the movie. He works security, so I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Demi Moore, call me. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you later.